with us. And less than a month to the end of his administration, President Muhammadu Buhari unveils an ambitious plan to create 165 million jobs by 2050 and place Nigeria among the world's top economies. Plus, President-elect in Rivers State to commission project by the Nyesom Wike government gives condition to getting project refunds. You have to lobby me, he says. Well, hello and welcome to our special edition of Politics Today in commemoration of the World Press Freedom Day. I'm Kayode Okikolu here in Lagos, Nigeria's commercial capital. Well, for the past 30 years, every 3rd of May is set aside by UNESCO as a reminder to governments on the need to respect their commitment to press freedom. It is also a day of reflection among media professionals about issues of press freedom and professional ethics. Incidentally, 30 years ago is also a significant date in Nigeria for Nigerians alike. The June 12 election, remember that? And of course, the struggle for democracy in the aftermath. So it looks like no coincidence with this one. But how far have we come with the protection of freedom of speech, especially because the theme for this year focuses on shaping a future of rights with a focus on freedom of expression as a driver of all other human rights? Well, we have a special package for you tonight, and our panelists are here. They are ready with decades of experience across board to dissect the issues. Stay with us, everyone. It's a very special one for you tonight. But let's begin with something that played out at the State House. It is a plan to create 165 million new jobs across the country and increase Nigeria's real GDP growth by 7% by 2050. Well, it is called the Nigeria Agenda 2050, which was launched by President Muhammadu Buhari. Well, the plan took about 3 years to put together. Well, it was launched just before the commencement of the weekly Federal Executive Council meeting. And in his remarks, President Buhari says the vision is a product of a dynamic knowledge-based economy to provide sustainable development by 2050. And he expressed the belief that the document, which equally aims to increase per capita income of Nigeria to $33,000 and more per annum, is going to place Nigeria among the world's top economies by that time, and it will be useful for subsequent administrations. Take a listen.
The steering committee is superintendent the preparation of the Nigerian Agenda 2050 and the National Development Plan 21-25 to succeed the Nigeria Vision 2020 and the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan 2017 to 2020, respectively. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, at the inauguration, I charged the steering committee to prepare inclusive plans that would cover all shades of opinion and ensure even and balanced development, as well as put in place necessary legislations for continuous implementation of plans, even after the expiration of the tenure of successive administrations. This was achieved with the preparation of the Volume 3 of the National Development Plan that deals with legislative imperatives who identified binding constraints to plan implementation in Nigeria.
So that's what the president said about the, Agenda 2050. If you were to do a quick math, that's exactly, 27 years from now. And he says it will be useful for subsequent administration. So that is yet another plan in the works. But let's also bring you this one. The president-elect was in Rivers State, south Nigeria today. You can call it his first major, rigorous public engagement since he returned from his month-long trip outside the country. Well, he was hosted by Governor Nyesom Wike for the inauguration of the 12th flyover in the state, the Rumuoku-Rumuola flyover. Well, speaking first, An excited Governor Wike actually pointed to some issues, particularly the procurement law. And for Governor Wike, he asked the president-elect to look into some provisions of the Procurement Act, which he says are responsible for the proliferation of abandoned projects by successive governments. He also appealed for a refund for executing federal projects.
I found out that part of the problem why we're having so much uncompleted projects has to do with our procurement law. If you read the procurement law, it will take it very, very long to complete projects, because how much does our procurement law, of course the one of the federal, how much does it say? 15% to 30%. When you give a contract of 15%, before you pay another money, inflation is almost every day. And then they will come for variation because of high cost of building materials. But in our own case, I called Mr. Speaker. I said, listen, we can't continue with this. We have to amend our own procurement law and give us the latitude where we can pay a company we know that has the capacity to deliver within time. We pay that company 70%. And that is why today no project being handled by Julius Berger that is uncompleted. Not one. The Remo Kursi is in East-West Road. The one of Rumaba is in Port Harcourt Aba Road. The one in Rumoda is in Port Harcourt Aba Road. The one in GRA is in Port Harcourt Aba Road. The one in Rumukarabo, Port Harcourt Aba Road. The one in Rebisi, Port Harcourt Aba Road. The one in Obunabali, Port Harcourt Aba Road. The one in Mbaba, the same thing. The one in Rumokoro, East-West Road. Now, if we have said because they are federal government roads and we don't do it, who are those to suffer? Is it not we? Yes. Is it not reverse people? So since we have said, look, we don't want our people to suffer. I also believe federal government should say, look, you've done well for us. These are projects we should be doing. Can you bring your bill? Let us refund you the money you have done these roads.
Well, on his part, the special guest and President-elect Senator Bola Tinubu maintained that he won the presidential election in February, while commending Governor Wike for insisting on a southern presidency. Well, he also believes that Governor Wike's conviction occasioned his reciprocity, saying he can't guarantee refunding the state government for executing federal projects. Lobby me, he says.
I am a very happy man. Happy because I went through a gruesome campaign, fought hard, beat myself, supported by many of you, and I won. Fair and square. Ism, I say thank you for your contribution to my victory. I couldn't have done it without some structural support, as not describable in a flyover. He did not choose to serve his own interests, not about him. Rather, the interests of the nation. You promoted unity. You promoted fairness. You championed justice. Thank you. The 12th flyover and the demand you made for refund, I owe you nothing. It's your road. You can chuckle me and make a demand. You are the one living on this road. I commend your effort. You have to lobby me to collect.
So that's the president-elect there speaking, saying that the governor of Rivers State, or the incoming governor in this case, will have to lobby him to get those reforms. But, you know, aside that, what is playing out there is quite interesting, politically speaking. So that's a president-elect of the All Progressives Congress visiting a state controlled by the PDP. Well, you may have seen that visit by two of the G5 governors to the president-elect's residence last week. That's Governor Nyesom Wike and Governor Seyi Makinde. So it's quite interesting what is playing out here. And for a lot of political scientists, they're trying to project what this will mean for Rivers State, why Rivers State is important to the president-elect, to the national politics. What will that mean in the coming days? Very, very interesting what is playing out there. But let's get into our special for tonight. It is on the World Press Freedom Day. It is something that concerns you and I. And let's start from President Muhammadu Buhari's statement on the day. For him, the rights of Nigerian journalists under his administration have remained protected and upheld in the past 8 years. And he's asking media professionals in the country to be patriotic, work for national cohesion, and exercise their freedom with a high sense of responsibility. President Buhari, in a statement signed by Special Advisor on Media and Publicity, Mr. Femi Adesina, rejoiced with media professionals on the occasion of the World Press Freedom Day, celebrated every May the 3rd. And he says that the landmark is a tribute to media professionals who risk their lives to keep society informed and educated. So that's what the president says about the World Press Freedom Day. But let's show you some figures, right? Let's take a look at some of this data provided by the CJID. And it dates back to as far back as 1993. Don't forget that this is the 30th commemoration of the World Press Freedom Day. For Nigeria, the data, if you could just pull them up, now shows that 12 journalists and media workers have been killed in the country from 1992, actually, up until this moment. There you see, in 1998, we had 2 fatalities. In 1999, 3, 2009, 1, 2010, 2, 2011, 1, 2012, 1, and 2019, 1, and 2020, yet another 1. And these are beyond figures. These are people who wanted to get the story to you and I, wanted to break that story, ensure that Nigerians are informed. There's even a further breakdown because you see attacks now for this year, since we're commemorating the World Press Freedom Day for this year. And you see that just in the first quarter of this year, 2023, 2 journalists were attacked in January, 19 in February, and 24 attacks were recorded in the month of March. But that's not all. There's still a further breakdown because we need to understand the categories of these attacks so we know where the issues are and what to, what to speak to. 6 of them, unlawful arrests, 2 threats, 2 SLAPPS, physical attacks, 21, and you see denial of access, 6, equipment damage, 3, harassment, 4, imprisonment, 1. That's just in the first quarter of this year. Let's do a further breakdown. The perpetrators of these attacks, who are they? 8 of them individuals, all right? 14 political thugs. 3 of these incidents by regulatory bodies. 14 of them by security personnel, 5 by state actors, and of course 1 is still a case that is unknown. And let's take a look at, geopolitical, spread of these attacks. 17, and that's the highest, recorded in the southwest region of the country, followed by 11 in the south-south. It's a tie, by the way, with the north-central, with 11 of these attacks as well. The northwest, 2 recorded, and the northeast, 3. So that gives us a sense of what we're dealing with here. And, the theme for this year's commemoration focuses on the freedom of speech as essentially a gateway to other freedoms. So let's get into our panel tonight. As I said, it is a special edition of Politics Today to discuss the World Press Freedom Day. It is a full panel. We have veterans on this panel. We have representation from the regulator and across board. So let me begin by introducing Mrs. Susan Obi, who is the Director of Public Affairs of the National Broadcasting Commission. She joins us live from our Abuja studio, as well as Mr. Christopher Ezeguzo. As you can see, it's a full panel. President of Nigerian Union of Journalists. Also joining us from our Abuja studio is Eniola Akikotu, who's the Chief Politics Correspondent, The Africa Report, as well as Busola Ajibola, the Deputy Director, Journalism, Center for Journalism, Innovation and Development, the CJID, that provided those figures. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the program tonight. And right here in our studio, we have Mr. Martins. It's great to have you, Mr. Martins Oloja. He's the Managing Director and Editor-in-Chief of the Guardian newspaper. Good evening, sir. Thank you for joining us as well.
Good evening.
I mean, quite a lot to chew on tonight, but I mean, we're news people, and I mean, we deal in news, informing the public. And I'd just like us to quickly start from what is playing out in River State, or what we saw play out in River State, just to get, I know a lot of us have broken that story yet already. We have, you know, different opinions that will come out. But seeing the president-elect's visit to River State, quite a very interesting dynamic. President-elect of the APC, a PDP governor. River State has always been PDP, but we see this romance across parties. Well, they say it's for the Southern presidency. That's why they're cutting across. Some predict that this relationship will fall out. But seeing what is playing out, what do you see as a press man who has followed this for decades now?
Well, it's all politics. I'm playing politics, politics of power sharing, politics of engagement with it, and the politics of what to do next. Politics of food is ready by May 29. 2023. That is what is playing on. The governor of Rivers State is also lobbying for something the morning after May 29. It's lobbying. He already told him, lobby me. And I think that one is a way of lobbying him to be something in the government that will be formed after May 29. It's all politics. But he has played the politics well. I mean, the governor of Rivers State, by inviting him, he will have opportunity of discussing with him. He will have opportunity, instead of flying to Lagos or Abuja, of lobbying him. Maybe tonight, if he slips in Port Harcourt. And that is critical. That's strategic. That's wisdom on his part to bring the president-elect to his domain, where he is still the governor. So that is all politics, as our brother Simon Kolawole will put it in his book. It's all politics.
It's interesting, I mean, hearing that insight. And let me take this to Mr. Ezeguzo. Again, we'll get into the main topic of tonight, but just to help Nigerians understand. Mr. Ezeguzo, what you see playing out there in River State, what do you make of it?
Well, the MD of Guardian newspaper has captured it very properly. He would agree with me that Governor Nyesom Wike of Rivers State is a very smart politician. This is the very first official engagement of the president-elect after the elections, and his first visitation is to a PDP, so to speak, enclave, Rivers State. And sitting right beside Governor Wike is Governor Seyi Makinde, and of course his bosom friend, BC Akonde, former governor of Osun State. So what you are seeing there playing out, I see it more as political intrigues. He's trying to create an opportunity for himself post May 29th, 2023, which is just about 3 weeks or thereabout away. So this is all politics. I want to align myself with the opinion expressed by Mr. Oloja, as captured in Simon Kolawole's book. It's all politics they are playing. And like Mr. President-elect said, lobby me. The opportunity for lobby has presented itself tonight. The whole of this night will be an opportunity to lobby, so that by May 29th, we will see what they have succeeded in getting out of this engagement tonight. It's just a matter of weeks. We'll get to know what they are discussing.
Quickly, Eniola, because I know you have reported this quite well. It's all politics, they have said, but I mean, how do people then interpret all of this?
Oh, well, first of all, it has nothing to do with the unity of Nigeria as they all discussing there. It's all about their own interests. That's the truth. Rivers has, in the last 4 years, been the headquarters of the opposition PDP. And you've seen Wike pull out. He's gradually pulling out because he's battling expulsion from the party. So he needs to remain relevant after May 29. He obviously is also looking for an appointment. And if you recall, Governor Umahi said a few weeks ago that Tinubu needs to appoint Tinubu needs to appoint Wike into his cabinet. So this is part of the lobbying that you're seeing. And it may seem Wike he might be on his way to the All Progressives Congress. That's the indication of all this. Because if you recall, a few days ago, Amaechi's ally was suspended from his position as the South-South chairman of the APC. Amaechi is, being relegated gradually, while Wike is the one that is now taking center stage. So it might just be, what you are seeing might just be the beginning of the end in Wike's journey in PDP. That's
all right. So, I mean, just to get an insight into what's playing out, so we don't just gloss over that, but let's get into the big one for tonight. And I'll go to Busola now, because those figures we reeled out was curated by CJID. In fact, there is even more that goes as far back as even some years. And I'd like you to just walk us through those figures we saw. What has been the impact of these attacks on, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, as it affects other rights? Essentially, that's the theme for this year's commemoration.
Absolutely. So thank you, Kayode. So it's so easy for people to just look at the figures and, not connect how violation of press freedom directly impacts citizens' rights. So we always, at CJID, we always like to remind citizens, remind the public that the essential work that journalists do is nothing but to enhance citizens' rights to freedom of expression, their right to access information, quality information that has gone through gatekeeping processes and that embraces the principles of accuracy, truth, verification. So when you have this trend and rise in attacks against journalists, against newsrooms, what you are also going to have is a situation where journalists either begin to self-censor themselves, so they have an obligation to report on accountability, they have an obligation to expand transparency, but because they know that they are susceptible to threats of not just physical attack, but deaths, it's so easy for people to crawl back, journalists now, to crawl back into their shelf, and we all now need to begin to reflect on what that can do, how that can endanger our democracy and all of our rights as a people.
Well, thank you very much, Busola. Let me bring in Susan Obi, because, I mean, you represent the regulator as well. And I'd like you to speak to the thinking, the mindset of this government expressed through the MBC regarding press freedom, freedom of expression, ensuring that everybody at least has a right platform to express themselves.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the fact that there's press freedom, but also appreciate the fact that freedom comes with responsibility. And that's, as regulators, one of our duties has been to ensure that regulation is to preserve the public from harm. And so in the communication of the provisions of the Nigeria Broadcasting Code and the communication of our duties as regulators, we try to advise and encourage that broadcasters recognize the fact that there's responsibility, they should they should be responsible in their communication and in their broadcasts, because freedom without responsibility is actually no freedom. we find out that where one's freedom begins is where another ends. So we should all appreciate the fact that there's responsibility, and we should encourage responsibility and recognize that everyone has a right to freedom. Actually, broadcasters should. We all know that in our communications, everyone does not have the same mindset, the same level of mindset. So a lot of times you could be misunderstood. So knowing that your communication could be misunderstood, you should be careful how you communicate. You should be mindful of how you put your words. You should be mindful of intentional about what you put out so that you don't get misunderstood. And in the course of being misunderstood, other people's freedom is impinged and harm could come to the society. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam. Let me come to Mr. Oloja. You've practiced for decades now, and I wonder, especially for the past 8 years, what the atmosphere has been like, how you have, fared under this administration in terms of putting out stories, the response you get from government. How has it been like, particularly under this administration?
Well, it is fair. It's not so bad. The response we've got from management of information from what we do, it's not so bad. Well, most of the times we talk about access and about response to the questionnaire we sent to people to be able to get information so that people will be educated and have informed opinion on public affairs. Sometimes the response is poor, and they have tried to, not only in the last 80 years, in the life cycle of democracy in the last 24 years, like that, they haven't actually responded to questionnaire we send, even through Freedom of Information Act. They try to suppress information, and that is the ingredient that we sell. That's the product that we sell, news. That's the thing we sell. And news is usually what somebody somewhere is trying to hide. The rest is advertising. That's the classic definition of news. The rest is advertising. So when you try to disclose, when you try to get something that they are trying to hide, they give you what they want to advertise. They don't normally respond. And occasionally when you publish some of these things like that, they try to teach journalism. The so-called Democrats try to teach journalism. And journalism is life wire of democracy. If you do not have freedom of expression, which is the mother of freedom of the press that we talk about. If we do not have that, democracy will be nothing. Democracy will be nothing. Well, in the last 8 years, yes, they can say that they have not put so many journalists in jail, but occasionally you see some of these executive excesses result in just arresting journalists anyhow in some state capitals. They arrest some journalists from one state capital and take to the other. Some governors have been reckless in violating the rights of journalists to do their job, whereas they do not remember that this job is constitutional. Section 22 in the Constitution as amended enables us to monitor governance and hold public officers to account. But when you try to do this, most times some governors will feel they take the law into their hand. They resort to self-help. Instead of going to court, they resort to self-help. They get some journalists arrested and detained. Sometimes DSS gets into it, and they just detain journalists anyhow. But then we can say it is fair. If we are not arrested like that, if they do not disturb us, it means that we are not doing our job.
I mean, you've made quite a salient point. And I know for Mr. Isiguzo, he's had to, show up for journalists time and again. The fourth estate of the realm, our job is very sacred to democracy. And Mr. Oloja here says that sometimes you even find government trying to teach, journalists how to do their job. In what areas do you think that this government perhaps dropped the ball and should have improved upon as a way to maybe help the coming government?
Well, thank you very much once more. I took time to go through the statistics you released from CJID concerning the state of press freedom in the country, especially the issues we had between January and the election time, and the figures you released. I want us to also look at the World Press Freedom Index as released by Reporters Without Borders. If you look at it critically, for instance, in 2020, we were about 125 out of 180 assessed countries in the world. And in 2021, we tried to improve, dropping about 5 points. We scored 120. In 2022, we relapsed again, scoring about 129. This year, we are 123 out of 180. What we've been doing is not, we've not maintained a steady improvement. We improve, we relapse, we improve, we relapse. And the statistics we have garnered from this year alone, about 56 confirmed attacks. And of course, we have also received an array of sanctions from the regulator, about 24 of them. And when you see this incessant interference, from the regulator, when you also see the increasing spate of attacks from state and non-state actors, it also tends to undermine substantially, press freedom. Like we know clearly, the media remains the oxygen of democracy. And I know that a particular newspaper in the UK, their motto is that democracy dies in darkness. Anytime you don't allow the media to freely operate without all these unnecessary, restrictions, encumbrances, and what have you, then you are indirectly undermining democratic governance. Section 22 of the 1999 Constitution as amended, Chapter 2, has reposed the responsibility of ensuring accountability in governance, transparency in governance, probity, in fact, the sum total of good governance in the media. And when the media is not allowed to operate, what it means is that you are not just undermining press freedom, you are undermining accountability, you are undermining transparency in governance, you are undermining the provision or delivery of good governance in such a system. So press freedom is key. And from what we have seen, the statistics we are seeing over time, for instance, in the last 4 years, it is not looking good. At every point in time, we tend to make improvement. Before we know it, we are relapsing. That is not a good one. Apart from this issue of harassment that we get from state and non-state actors, apart from the harassment from the regulator, there are also all the other issues that tend to undermine press freedom. For instance, you have the economic challenge that journalists face in this climate. That in itself is a major drawback to press freedom in the country. When journalist is poorly remunerated, it is not looking good. When journalist is epileptically remunerated, it is not looking good. When journalist is not paid what is commensurate with what he puts into the system, it doesn't look good. Of course, we also look at the issue of censorship. Censorship coming from owners, the owners of media houses. We also talk about censorship coming from data boys, those who call data boys, those that are engaged by political actors to inflict psychological harm on journalists who do their thing professionally. But in order to set more like a drawback to them, they unleash their data boys who engage in digital blackmail. Today, we have the online media, you have the social media. So they have platforms with which to attack journalists. It may not come as a physical attack. It comes as a psychological attack. And once you are psychologically attacked, what happens to you is that you relapse to your shell. You are no longer allowed to freely deliver professionally. That is it. So when you put all these things together, you see that to a very large extent, as a country, we don't seem to be making progress. We do one step forward, we do 3 steps backwards. And that's all right,
Mr. Isiguzo, we're due for a break now. Quite a number of issues have been raised, and we need to answer those questions pointedly. Is there press freedom in Nigeria? Is there freedom of expression as it ought to be in Nigeria? These questions we'll take on after this break. So, ladies and gentlemen, please stay with us. Welcome back to our World Press Freedom Day special. The theme for this year's commemoration is Shaping a Future of Rights, Freedom of Expression as a Driver for All Other Human Rights. We have a full panel and the conversation is quite interesting. So let me go to Eniola now. Eniola Akikotu is the Chief Politics Correspondent, the Africa Report. Eniola, the question is simple. Is there press freedom in Nigeria? Or even stretch it, how well is there freedom of expression in Nigeria?
Well, certainly there's press freedom. It's just the level of the press freedom that's the issue now. You still have media houses being raided in this country 24 years after Nigeria became, a democratic country. So in 2019, you had soldiers going to Daily Trust because there was a report which they said breached national security. And the soldiers remained there until there was a statement from the villa, and then the soldiers were withdrawn. Last year, to People's Gazette, you had government agents also there. They raided the place and arrested some journalists as well. Even the website of that online newspaper, the People's Gazette, has been down for the last 2 years because they reported a story which the government found unfavorable. Also, is this issue of the Cybercrime Prevention Act. That law is so nebulous and ambiguous that it's been used to abuse the rights of so many journalists. Just last month, 2 journalists from News Guru were detained for a week by the Nigeria Police Force because they wrote a story about a former bank chairman and involved with his mistress, or something like that. Now, ideally, these kind of stories, if you have any problem with them, you should, sue for libel or defamation. But because most stories that newspapers and media houses, in fact, even TV stations, once you reported a story, you put it on your website, you put it on social media. So once that has been done, it then becomes an online issue. And then you can arraign a journalist for cyber stalking, cyber bullying. There's so many journalists that are picked up on a weekly basis, which even go unreported. You have the likes of Agba Jalingo, who has become a regular now in prison, who is always in and out. You have, there's so many of them, and a lot of them go unreported, especially the ones at the state level. Those who are community journalists, who report for community newspapers, you have so many of them like that. But because they are not working for big platforms, a lot of people don't know about their plight. If, for instance, I'm picked up, or maybe someone from one of the major newspapers or TV stations is arrested, within minutes you see it all over social media and all that. But there are so many of them who are working in small community newspapers that nobody even knows about their plight. So this is the problem. These are the challenges that we face. So yes, there's press freedom, but what level of press freedom exists? That is the question.
Busola, your thoughts now on just the level of press freedom that exists in Nigeria?
Yeah, so...
Okay. Oh, okay, so can you take that again?
I want your opinion on the point that Eniola just made, the press freedom day. Just what level of press freedom, freedom of expression exists? So what are those key issues which you have been tracking as well?
Okay, so if we go by the rating of the global ratings of press freedom, and if we are number 123 out of 180, I don't think that's a pass mark. And considering the figure that we have, last year, I know that we tracked and verified. So we only don't track, so we verify. So the verified number of attacks that we can confirm last year was 54. And if in just the first 3 months of 2023, we now have 45. I think that is alarming enough for all of us to begin to see that there is a problem and there is some form of hostility against press freedom, against people's right to access information, against people's freedom of expression. So when you also look at one of the trends that we notice, which simply put is that violators of journalist safety, violators of press freedom enjoy enormous impunity. So far, in almost all the cases of attacks that we have tracked, whether it is newsrooms being raided, whether it is equipment being destroyed, whether it is when journalists are killed, whether journalists are detained or incarcerated, not one single time have we had anyone being investigated or being prosecuted or being brought to book. I think that is a serious indictment on our democracy, on what we mouth as press freedom. So if that is, if our idea of press freedom is that a journalist can, get picked up randomly anywhere and get locked up, and nobody thinks of going through the process of charging them to court, then there is a problem. Apart from all these attacks that we reeled out, the data that we shared with the public today, that is 2 journalists being attacked in January, 19 being attacked in February, 24 being attacked in March. There is this growing trend of SLAP. So SLAP is strategic litigation against, I think, public, I can't, but it's SLAP. So almost all newsrooms today, and I can tell you about mainstream news that have nothing less than 55 cases of SLAPs. Why? Because some powerful individuals would want to gag the media. So there are stories that the media is on that some people somewhere in government, powerful individuals do not want the public to know, and they just take the newsrooms to court. So in a situation where newsrooms are encountering the challenge of economic stability, where newsroom revenues have dwindled, newsroom cannot afford to pay their salaries of their workers. Imagine newsrooms now having to, struggle with 55 cases. Where would the resources come from? So I think these are dynamics that we now need to begin to pay serious attention to. And how do we, I think the question we want to start answering now, and we need to set the agenda for the incoming government, is what priorities indeed do we want to give to press freedom? Do we, and I'm glad that the NUJ president is here. I don't know, we've been working for so long to make Section 22 justiciable. So you confer a constitutional responsibility on the media to always hold powerful individuals and the government accountable to people at all times. But that particular section is not justiciable. So a journalist cannot say, oh, my right has been violated, and then go to court based on that section. Now, that is problematic. That is one of the problems that we need to address. The incoming government would need to put press freedom at the front burner of policymaking. We need to come up with a national policy that ensures the safety of journalists and that guarantees press freedom. We need to begin to think, how do we nudge the public? How should government, work together with media, to fund the ecosystem?
Pardon me to come in here.
Realize that journalism is the lifeblood of democracy.
Right.
I think that's something that everybody have to commit to.
Indeed. Let me come in here, Busola, if you can hear me. By the way, the SLAPP you mentioned is a strategic lawsuit against public participation and essentially litigations to censor and burden newsrooms, for example, with that cost of litigation. So it's just a lot of burden. So it's important you also mention that. But let me quickly go to Mrs. Obi. We're coming to setting an agenda as we wind down for the incoming administration. But I just wanted to take up this point because it's been raised severally in public space and conversations. You know, the sustainability or the proprietary nature of having government regulate the media, the same government that the press is reporting on, that the press is trying to demand sustainability, transparency and accountability from. So just how sustainable is that? Because there have been calls for having some sort of self-regulation, since they're professionals anyway.
This is all very interesting. Like you said, the statistics, we all listen to the statistics, and they are not just figures, they are human beings. And it's a lot of concern too. Personally, it's a lot of concern when, in the course of monitoring broadcast regulations, we find that a lot of information is being brought to the fore and it just ends there. So we wonder what our government, there should be responsibility too from institutions taking up this information that has been brought to the fore. But like, as regulators, as broadcast regulators, we understand that everyone should have access to broadcast platform. We understand that and we recognize that. But we also recognize that the access to broadcast platform and the freedom of expression on the broadcast platform should not be used to undermine the peace of the nation. We're all saying that, we're not saying that. A lot of times it's been, I don't want to say it's misunderstood, that regulation is seen as gagging. The broadcaster is responsible, yes. And so he should self-censor, yes. But does he do that? And that is why there is the need for the National Broadcasting Commission. We recognize that everyone wants to sometimes be the one to break the news, but there should be a consideration of the impact of that information, the impact of that news. We appreciate the fact that information should be put out. Well, there's the call for the responsibility in putting out that information. Like we have said, I said earlier on, not everyone has the same mindset. And we should be interested also in the impact of the information we're putting out. That is where we come in as regulators. No one is saying that people should be denied access to information. That's not what the Commission is saying, or what the Commission's responsibility is geared at. There should be access to information. In fact, it is encouraged, that's the duty of broadcasting, to bring information to the fore of all people, of all persons, so that right decisions can be made. But then you should be mindful of how that information is put out, and that's where the responsibility comes in.
Right. Well, thank you, Madam. Let me come to Mr. Oloje now. Expectations for the incoming government, especially, I mean, we've seen in recent times an aide to the president-elect petitioning the NBC and all of that. So I wonder what your expectations will be vis-a-vis that case and the coming months. What do you expect from this government?
What I expect from this government is not to be talking about regulation. They should be talking about robustness of the Nigerian media, because Nigeria is actually the most important country in Africa, and we are boasting of having the most populous black nation in the world. We are supposed to have vibrant media that will project the glamour, the power of the continent. So we should not suppress the press. They should not be talking about regulation. You know, the idea of somebody in a campaign organization petitioning a regulator, and the regulator will carry out the petition. Even the person who wrote the petition had a hate speech in the social media, talking about Igbo people. This should be the last time that they should interfere in Lagos politics. That's hate speech. Who regulated that? Who petitioned that? Who punished that? And that one has caused problem, even for the government. Now, what they should do is to go ahead and ensure that they handle the following thing. First, in a new government, in 21st century, you don't need Ministry of Information that will be regulating, a regulator will be an agency of. In other words, we do not need an agency that is a regulator that will be that will be accountable to a Ministry of Information. They should check all over the civilized world. You have Ministry or Department of Communication. No information anymore. You have Minister of Information. They should scrap the Ministry of Information in the first instance and allow those public broadcasters to have freedom first. Public broadcasters, NTA, Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria, Voice of Nigeria, should be consolidated. Look at South Africa here. South Africa has the SABC that is robust as a public broadcaster. BBC is like that. It's attached to culture department in UK. And anytime even government doesn't like what BBC is doing, they report BBC to Parliament. Indeed. And people who are aggrieved go to court. The regulatory body that we are looking at, and the officers are appointed by the president, and they are an agency of Federal Ministry of Information. And Minister of Information is always talking and also attacking people. We don't need that in a robust government. We don't need that anymore.
Let me take the final words from Mr. Iseguzoye. We have less than a minute, in fact, about 30 seconds to wind down. Expectations from the incoming government.
Well, thank you. Before I go to expectation, very briefly, since we're talking about regulatory body, for us, at the level of Nigerian Press Organization, NPO, made up of Nigerian Union of Journalists, the Guild, the NPAN, the Guild of Corporate Online Publishers, and the rest, we've already come up with a co-regulation. Quite recently, we launched the National Media Complaints Commission, the National Ombudsman. So the issue of government trying to come in and regulate us, I think we've been able to address it because we have brought the MBA, we have brought government representative, we brought the media, we brought the civil society organization, all strata of the society, we have brought them together so that we'll be able to check some of these infractions within the media space. Now, number two, expectation from the incoming administration. One of the major challenges that we have plaguing against media freedom or press freedom is the issue of array of legal, the legal framework, actually. Somebody has already made reference to Cybercrime Prohibition Act of 2015. I believe that by the time the new administration comes on board, they are going to look at this act because it's doing indeed a great disservice.
Well, Mr. Iseguzo, we have to run now. I apologize. I mean, this is a very important conversation, but we're restricted by time. But I'd like to thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for your time. It's been a very interesting conversation. Lots of takeaways for this current government and the incoming one. Once again, thank you so much. And, well, let's keep doing our jobs, and God bless Nigeria. Well, that's been the package for tonight, everyone. The conversation continues anyway. I'm Kayode Okikelu. Good night.